The £157 billion secret. What if one of the greatest treasures in medieval Europe didn't actually disappear? What if it was moved? In March 1244, shortly before the fall of Montségur, four men carried an extraordinary fortune away from the mountain. Gold, precious stones, property deeds, documents, and one secret that would remain hidden for more than 700 years. In 1992, inside the Equis Bellici Repository in Hoboken, New Jersey, Professor Sir Roger Graham and Godfrey Jones compare two surviving inventories. And the numbers are staggering. But it isn't the size of the fortune that troubles them. It's the fact that the two inventories don't match. One records the equivalent of more than £157 billion. The other accounts for barely 9% of it. Someone at Montségur had been playing a very different game. But the man Roger Graham identifies wasn't deceiving Gerard de Villiers and Hugo de Besançon. He was the one being deceived. And behind him stood someone considerably more dangerous. I am Di-Fanteria, this is Ursus, and this is the £157 billion secret. This was Professor Sir Roger Graham's first visit to New Jersey, and his first time at what the group colloquially called HQ. Well, not everyone. To Godfrey Jones, it was known, at least to him, in honour of the tallest waterfall in Wales. The one in question has a 90-foot drop, and a secret cave is accessible if you're brave enough to walk straight through the falling water. As the doors to the elevator opened on the 10th floor, Roger was greeted by Godfrey himself, who had made his way back from the Millennium Hilton just an hour before. "Welcome to Henrid Falls!" With a huge smile, the professor was embraced by the dozy bloody Welshman and had to fend him off. "Bloody hell, Taff, long time no see, but really? And when did you join the Beard Club?" Backing away, the technical whiz began to apologise. "Oh, this thing. Oh, well, some of the best of us have them, so I didn't want to be left out, see. Now, here's lovely. Sorry, it's good to see you. Hugo will be over in the next few hours. How was your flight? Do you want the tour or breakfast?" The flight was extremely comfortable, and I hope it has revealed much that we didn't know before, but I'm sure we'll get to that later today. Tell you what, let's start with breakfast. I understand your speciality is steak and eggs. "Your wish is my command, O Knight of the Realm. Follow me. It's time to hit the kitchen in Living Space 3. That's your gaff for the duration. It's the best apart from my basher. There's a balcony overlooking the Big A. You'll love it." "Thanks, Taff, and please stop the Knight of the Realm shit. Living Space 3 sounds very appealing. Can't you name the living area something a bit more evocative?" he said as they made their way across the enormous space. "Don't ask me, Your Honour. I just work here." "Bugger off, you dozy Welsh bastard. And by the way, hurry up, I'm famished." Intrigued by the various unnamed doors that he passed on his way to Living Space 3, Roger almost changed his mind regarding the order of events. But then he smelled onions and mushrooms searing. There was also a not-so-subtle hint of roasting garlic. There was no going back. Nothing could have halted, interfered with, or delayed his newfound forward momentum. Even though it was 4:30 in the morning, he was full of energy and bon vivant, looking forward to his breakfast. And he was not to be disappointed. It was exquisite, and he and Godfrey spent a pleasant hour eating and chatting as the dark dissipated. At 5:45, he looked across to the two towers of the Empire State Building and took in the fantastic panorama that made up this world-renowned skyline. He was thrilled and dumbfounded at the sight. Unbeknownst to him, but clearly to William and Hugo, this spot was indisputably the number one viewpoint for observing the sunrise over Manhattan. This amazing natural event was beyond magnificent, and brought up as he had been in the beautiful Scottish countryside, he was forever unashamed and astounded to admit that this was better than anything he had ever witnessed. And he would never forget it. Thanking his host for such an amazing repast and an overwhelming experience, he was somewhat surprised but tremendously heartened when Godfrey said, without a hint of his customary sarcasm, "You are very welcome, my old war sword. I am delighted to be with you on your first, and let's hope not your last, Hudson River solar revelation." Pausing, he looked his old friend in the eyes and said, "Do you know, I have lived here for many, many years, but I'm utterly enchanted every time I see that." Headquarters itself was located at River Street Apartments on Sinatra Drive in Hoboken, New Jersey. It took up the entire 10th floor and covered almost 35,000 square feet. The internal layout was practical, with all of the living spaces having a large balcony, 2 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms, and a communal sitting room and kitchen. They were all completely self-sufficient and had an incredible view across the Hudson River and Manhattan. Living space 4 was generally used for conferences and meetings. The entire roof was a helipad, which could accommodate at least 4 Chinooks at once. Such was the forethought that had gone into its design. The fervent hope was that this would never be necessitated, but you just never knew. Taft then gave Roger a complete guided tour of the facility. 2 extremely engaging hours were spent, during which there were numerous questions and many demonstrations of different bits of kit, from local to satellite communications and tracking kit to the pipe range. It was here that Roger took great pleasure in firing his favourite bundook, the Mark II Martini Henry, a breech-loading single-shot rifle with a rather pleasing lever action. Taft never missed a trick and made sure to highlight the connection to his homeland as Roger was aiming. "Do you know that the chief got that in late 1879 from General Pringle Taylor?" "Who?" said Roger. "Oh, he was the colonel of the regiment, 24th of Foot, otherwise known as the South Wales Borderers." Roger paused, turned to him and said, "You mean this bundook was fired at Rorke's Drift?" "Every bloody dozy Welshman would know that, but yes, a genuine participant in the famous battle. As are the bullets," said Taft, looking very proud indeed. Roger was pleased as punch, and somewhat surprised that they had a working rifle in such good condition, along with the ammunition to go with it. That was until he was shown into the technology lab, and became quite giddy with excitement at the different machines, banks of computer screens, weapons and cabinets, and best of all, in a corner was a large area that looked very much like a set from a Q briefing in a James Bond film. It was full of what he could only fathom were prototypes for a whole range of different bits of highly technical and most probably deadly but critical equipment. Taft had seen faces like the professor's on every occasion he had opened the lab to a visitor. "Now, Roger, let me intercede as I can see it in your face. If you attempted to ask, I don't have a poison knife shoe, a Bell Textra jetpack, an exploding watch, a sonic agitator, nor, would you believe, a mini-escape submarine. You've been warned." They walked across the open space, and Taft opened the nameless door, which opened into the operations room. It was not a hive of activity by any stretch of the imagination. A stern-looking young woman in her early 30s with a shock of short pink hair was tapping away at the main console as various screens displayed what appeared to be images of speech patterns, suggesting it was either a live recording of an intercept or a playback. There were also maps with street plan views on which several red, blue, or green dots were either in motion or stationary, serving as individual trackers. She had a pair of headphones on and didn't hear or see them come in. Taft tapped her on the shoulder and she instantly lost her serious face, took off the headset, and turned to Roger, beaming. "Sir Roger, it's a great pleasure to meet you. I'm Molly Pinkerton." "That Pinkerton, yes. Family." Roger was immediately impressed and couldn't let the moment pass without mentioning the family's famous past. "My dear, that's interesting. They were the originators of the US Secret Service, the great detective agency that's laid its foundation with the War Department. They're still in business, I believe." "You certainly know your history, Professor. They are indeed. Based in Chicago. I spent 10 years with them till I was poached by young Godfrey here." Shaking her hand, Roger was genuinely impressed and very pleased as Molly then gave him a thorough familiarization with the workings of the operational hub, the very beating heart and center of the organization's international web. "Many thanks, Molly. I'll see you later," he said as he and Taft left the ops room and passed through the tech lab. They were now standing where Taft had told Roger the repository was located. Not that Roger could discern a door in the true sense of the word. Anyone not connected to the team who got inside the 10th floor, not that this ever took place, would have noted that none of the rooms in headquarters bore a sign on the door. This was a not-so-subtle delaying tactic for anyone proficient enough to break in, which was, as Taft had ensured, virtually impossible. A variety of different ruses had been employed. Taft had used an assortment of contractors for construction, so no single firm had an overall understanding of the project or the floor layout. No blueprints were filed anywhere. The original building department permit was cloaked through a senior contact in the Pentagon. So next to the floor 10 on the wall behind the concierge desk in the reception area of the building, Henry Falls Investments Incorporated was clearly visible and provided the level of obscurity they had aimed for. Taft had personally designed the security features and ensured that the equipment was installed in-house. This applied to maintenance, cleaning, and indeed all the operational activities that took place at HQ. Everyone walked in to make sure everything worked and to maintain its effective invisibility. "Very interesting, Taft. Thanks for taking the time to babysit the tourist. It's amazing, and is everything you would imagine for the secret international headquarters of our organization." "Okay, 007. Let's get on, shall we?" It was evident to Roger that although the plain door subterfuge had been employed, a considerable amount of artwork was on display. Along the walls there hung some exquisite paintings. They were all housed in protective see-through glass mounts and constituted an oddly eclectic mix of traditional landscapes and more modern pieces. Steadfastly non-controversial, but pleasant to the eye nonetheless. Most notably, they were all 2 foot by 6 feet, a standard imperial dimension, as it so happened. This was intentional, not because William or Hugo had poor eyesight or preferred larger works. It was part of the subterfuge and concealment plan. Roger was looking at one while being teased by his Welsh companion. "Interesting piece, that one. What's that meant to be?" he asked. He was now leaning in closer to the peculiar acrylic, which was a colour representation of about 24 human hands, forearms and palms. The appendages were all pointing upwards and looking very much like it was a representation of an undersea plant, but he couldn't fathom it at all. Yeah, very peculiar indeed. Not a clue. His nose was only a foot or so from the print as he said this. Taff then approached the framed peculiarity, and Roger was astounded when Taff reached out his open left palm and placed it against the painting. The placement, as it happened, was exactly on the right-hand palm, depicted within the maelstrom of human limbs, almost at the top and centre of the unusual picture. The instant his hand, which matched the painted replica precisely, touched the glass, the outline of his hand began to glow. It was a bright green illumination, and before Roger could ask what was happening, there came a low hum from inside the frame, followed by an audible hiss, and he looked in utter amazement as the picture frame started to open, just as if it were a door. Not surprisingly, that's exactly what it was. "By my sainted trousers, Q! You've surpassed yourself!" He took a breath. "Unbelievable! But how?" Instantly realising that he was in imminent danger of being on the receiving end of an in-depth 15-minute technical monologue on the specifications of the incredible feat of engineering he had just witnessed, he was relieved as Taff said, only, that yes, it's an infrared sensor. That specific palm is mine. And 3 others can also open it by pressing their facsimile against it. If I were to try and open it by palming it with one of their sensors, it would not open." He stepped over the sill and entered the large and dimly lit room. "Ingenious!" Roger exclaimed. He followed Taff into the inner sanctum, looking at the back of the door as he did so. He could see nothing. Indeed, very ingenious. This particular room was extraordinary. The organisation's cache was a vast library of historical artefacts, containing an index catalogue of all the items hidden and protected within. It was also constructed under strict guidelines. Godfrey and Molly were both qualified conservators, having achieved this status through fellowships at the Smithsonian's Museum Conservation Institute. It went without saying that this was done using false identities. At MCI, they had become experts in various procedures, such as controlling temperature and humidity, which were vital steps in creating a safe storage environment. Crucially, this required knowledge of the chemical and physical properties, as well as the long-term behaviour of a wide range of materials. Upon completing the intensive tuition and practical training, they had become extremely proficient in how humidity, temperature, and pollutants can influence the long-term care and preservation of the items they had in storage. Over time, they had become intimately familiar with the techniques, the equipment, and the resources required to manage these critical environmental factors. So, for instance, a metal artifact would require a climate-controlled, dehumidified environment to protect it from corrosion. Manuscripts and paper documents needed to be stored in protective archival boxes and folders made of acid-free materials. The documents held in the repository were not viewed, handled, or manipulated to anything like the extent of the intense use of similar precious artifacts within a museum, for instance, and so extraordinary steps to ensure their protection were unnecessary. But nevertheless, Taff and Molly had developed an in-house process that allowed documents to be transferred to clear mylar folders or sleeves. This had been superseded very recently, in fact, only a month before, as they had adopted a technique developed at MCI, which digitised the documents, allowing the originals to be sealed and remain preserved. They had already started digitising the documents chronologically, beginning with the oldest first. To date, it was unfortunate that they hadn't reached the 13th century yet. So it was that the delicate procedure of opening, protecting, and then reading the Montségur documents began. Molly had joined them, and she began to search the catalogue for the precise location of not only the cylinder and its enclosure, but also the original document that Hugo had written. Okay, let's recap what we know. The McDougalls, or Owen alone, wanted the treasure, so he entrusted the cylinder containing the documents in question to our very own and very innocent Bernard de la Roche. We determined that Owen may have confided in his son, perhaps on his deathbed in 1268. The question remains, was he working alone? I think we can agree to discount Alexander outright for the following reasons. Number one, Edward I, known as Longshanks as well as the Hammer of the Scots, altogether an unpleasant individual. Amongst other less than laudable accomplishments, he was King of England, Lord of Ireland, and Duke of Aquitaine. In 1305 he created a council of 20 to advise his lieutenant, who was ruling Scotland in his stead. Amongst these 20 were Alexander himself and Robert the Bruce. But Bruce murdered the father of the man's wife a year later, and by so doing created a blood feud with the families of the murdered man. They, in turn, sought vengeance against Robert the Bruce. Alexander had fought on the Scottish side in the Wars of Independence, but his father-in-law's brutal murder changed all that. And the 1307 tip-off to William was the next piece of evidence for the defence, as is the fact that Hugo dug the cylinder out of the ground in 1944. After a defeat in summer of 1308 at the Battle of Brander, Alexander is known to have attended Bruce's Parliament at St Andrews sometime in the spring of 1309. At this gathering, Robert the Bruce forfeited Sir Alexander's lordship of Lawn and most of his vast lands of Argyll and the Isles. They were distributed to Bruce's allies, the MacRuries, the Campbells and the MacDonalds. So who then, if there was an accomplice or even worse, a leader within the Cathar stronghold? Well, my strong feeling is that, based on what Hugo and William have said, there must have been someone assisting Owen. Roger paused as Molly completed the search, checking to be certain she had it right before opening any of the hermetically sealed containers. It was Taff who then carried on the review. Less said about that long-legged figure, a long streak of piss, the better. He caused nothing but trouble, that man. Anyway, sorry. So William and Hugo had the entire inventory. Would it follow that if someone were within Montségur, we would expect the two documents to be almost identical? Well, close at the very least. But we must compare them and see what we can find. We may then need to complete an analysis of the handwriting, and yes, we have both the expertise and the facilities right here. Excellent, of course you have. How silly of me. And if Ellie finds anything startling with the clan chief, we may well have to reassess, but I think I'm confident that we're on the right track. An hour later, they had examined the two documents in detail. Godfrey had put together two spreadsheets for easy comparison and to send out to the rest of the team should they wish to reference them. The spreadsheet showed the date the document was signed, who was on the ropes, and exactly what they carried. It then indicated the value of the swag at the time and how that equated in 1992. Holy shit! No wonder you can afford all this gear, exclaimed Roger as he looked at the first printed sheet. Completed and signed by Gerard de Villiers and Hugo de Besançon, 12th of March 1244, so 2 days before the flit. He then read out the figures. Worth in 1244, 216 million, 250, what? And in 1992, 157,647,000,000. That's 157 billion. Good heavens. Godfrey tapped another few keys on the computer. No shit, Sherlock. The 13th century equivalent would have bought you 121 million horses, 263 million cows, 7 billion stones of wool, 5 billion quarters of wheat, and you would be able to employ on a skilled tradesman's wage per day 100 million employees. He, too, paused, with a look on his face hitherto never before seen. The amounts in question utterly dumbfounded him. "I've never seen the accounts. It's not my bag. But bloody hell, I think we can survive on that, don't you?" "Might ask for a raise, mind. Now, let's do the comparison." They picked up the second sheet, which was the inventory that Owen and his accomplice, if he had one, had allegedly completed and had been secreted near Oradour-sur-Glane by Bernard de la Roche on his way to meet Gerard and Hugo at Massy Abbey late in 1307. Roger was the first to comment. "My dear boy, this is staggering. They're accounting for less than 10% of the haul. I mean, that's still a king's ransom, and if you are one akin to skullduggery, you'd sell your mother for all that." Godfrey then read out the raw numbers. Worth in 1244, 20,241,000, and in 1992, 14,707,000. King's ransom, my arse! You could buy back all the kidnapped members of every single royal family globally with that little lot, at least 1,000,000 times over. So 14 billion, and yes, as you said, only 9% of the original inventory. Roger then noticed the date it was completed and sealed in the cylinder. It was the day before the original was put together. I suspect, based upon the date the second one was written and signed, that our very own two rascals who went down the ropes first must have had an extra stash. Yes, and both have the same abseilers in the documents. They would have carried more weight than the other two. Taff interjected. "Not two, three. The Black Combin was a good guy too, don't forget." "Quite right. Did you annotate on the sheets who signed and sealed them?" "Oh shit, no. Here, have a look." They bent over the first original document, which was sealed under a clear protective layer, and the unmistakable, very readable signatures were as follows. "There is the seal of the preceptor and Hugo's too," said Roger. He then looked over the second original document. What he saw was even more astounding than the net value revelations only a few minutes earlier. "Bingo again! Jacobus de Fleming. Jacobus is Flemish for James." His work on the flight across was verified. He had been right. "I knew it! Fleming did have a skin in the game. This is Robert Fleming's father, born in 1191. He was 53 as the flip was taking place. I'll grant you old in medieval terms, but he was a Highlander, let's not forget. There can be no doubt that he was one of the inside men, and it was his son, don't forget, who decapitated the Red Comyn in 1306 after the Bruce had stabbed and killed him." "Holy shit, Roger, that's big. Doesn't that then tie into the email from a few weeks back? You said Roger Fleming had posted it." "Well, it's not the same one, of course. The website was links to one of the former heads of the, what was it, Ananurba?" "Taff, my young dragon, you're spot on, and he lives in Munich. I would say that with this evidence we can postpone Ellie's run up to Scotland. I think it's now a complete dead rubber. Taff, can you punch out an immediate to William and Ellie? Tell them that Donnelly is on hold." "Will do, Roger, no worries." Taff disappeared into the ops room and came back within 3 minutes. "It's all done. Molly's on it, and she's trying to put a tracker on your man in Munich. We'll confirm with the Berlin gang once she has an address." "Excellent, excellent. Right, I'm going to take a long hot shower and then take a wee nap. Too much going on. Perfect day." And with that, he was gone. And in the ops room, Molly had just sent this. "Immediate. This is Pinkerton. Claymore and Dragon have confirmed the 1244 inside men. Juliet to cancel Donnelly. 14:15 hours Zulu. 24th of the 4th, 1992. So, £157 billion. It is a ridiculous amount of money, and of course that figure belongs to the fictional world of Ursus. But the history surrounding the mystery does not. Montségur really did fall in March 1244 after a prolonged siege during the Albigensian Crusade. One of the enduring mysteries surrounding its final days concerns something that happened apparently just shortly before the fortress surrendered. According to later testimony, several men escaped from Montségur carrying something belonging to the Cathar community. Exactly what they carried remains uncertain. Money, documents, religious objects, or something else entirely. That uncertainty has helped create the legend of the so-called Cathar treasure. And this is where Ursus steps into the space left by history. In the novel, the treasure becomes something very different. It's not simply gold. It contains property, currency, precious stones, and most importantly, documents. Gerard de Villiers and Hugo de Besançon record what was removed from Montségur, but another inventory exists. And when Roger Graham and Godfrey Jones compare them in 1992, they discover that the second document accounts for only 9% of the original fortune. That discrepancy is fiction. So are the inventories. The £157 billion valuation and the Equis Bellici Repository beneath the innocuous cover of Henry Fall's investment at Hoboken is also obviously fiction. But they allow the story to ask a question that sits at the heart of Ursus. What happens when the historical record tells us that something occurred, but cannot tell us everything that happens? And that's where historical fiction gets interesting. Not by changing what we know, but by exploring what we don't. 4 men really were said to have escaped Montségur. Something was carried with them. History does not tell us exactly what that does. Ursus does. Until next time, I'm Di-Fanteria, and this is Ursus.